What kind of problems would you, my listener, have if we had a hamburger restaurant neutrality act that all providers of hamburger creation services had to honor? What if you had a retail furniture trucking neutrality act as well? And here Jeffrey Tucker says, let's imagine that a retailer furniture company were in a position to offload all the shipping costs to the trucking industry. And it would do so by a government decree that truckers are not permitted to charge any more or less, whether they're shipping one chair or a whole house full of furniture. Would the furniture sellers favor such a deal? Absolutely. He says they could call this furniture neutrality and fob it off on the public as preventing control of furniture by the shipping industry. And that's what we face in the internet sector. And that is from what we have today for the past 2 years under what's called net neutrality. You know, the idea of something being neutral by compulsion should always alarm you, my listener. But Ajit Pai, who is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, proposes that we end what the advocates of net neutrality support, and that is an economics-free zone, a zone where economics really doesn't apply. And where we have to regulate things in favor of the incumbents, because that is what net neutrality seems to be about. It's the idea of net neutrality is that it promotes, right?
I don't think so, David. And I think you made the example of what Jeffrey Tucker used, the idea of sending a chair versus changing a whole house full of furniture. And I think that's a good analogy when we look at the internet, because when we look at the internet, you actually have two costs. You have the cost of making the connection itself, which would be the cost of having that truck come to you to pick up or deliver the furniture. And then you have a second cost, which is the volume that you are sending. Whether it's a single chair or a whole room full of furniture. In the internet example is, am I sending something small, an email, something larger, a phone conversation, such as this one that we're happening right now, or video, which is huge in comparison. It's the letter versus the chair versus the room for furniture. They have different costs involved. And so you have the cost of me getting the truck to you and the cost of me delivering the goods. And the same analogy is there with the internet. And in a free market would decide, okay, if I want to come to you and provide the service, I will provide the service for you with these two price factors involved. How much it takes for me to physically connect to you, bring a wire, bring a fiber optic cable, bring a radio connection to you, and then how much it costs for me to deliver every byte of data. If I could do that in a free market, you can go from vendor A, vendor B, vendor C, and pick what matches your particular desires, your needs, your cost-benefit ratio as an individual, as a consumer.
Well, it seems like the system allows what cable companies already do. They say a cable company will say, if you want to be our customer, you can only buy among these 6 packages, but each one of them is 80 times bigger than what you really want. So you have to buy a package, and so what that allows the company to do is subsidize those programs that are not popular, that really aren't really wanted, by making you pay for them through the limitation on your options. You can't buy from a cable company a single channel, and so they know that, and so they force one party to subsidize other parties. Is that what's happening here, John Kozlowski, with the net neutrality rules that are on their way out?
Yes, I believe, it is, I would suggest another example is if I go to Walmart, I effectively have I have a huge supply of options, but it's very limited. It's only what they provide. Compared to if I go to a farmer's market, I can go to vendor A, vendor B, vendor C. I have a much greater choice, and I can get what interests me, what benefits me, which is, in a sense, the difference between going through a Walmart or a mall also. But there is that aspect of it. But then there's the other side of the coin: is why would a large business want to do this? Why do they want the regulation? They want the regulation because regulations protect large businesses. This is true in virtually every arena. It does protect large businesses, and but then you have this facade of the larger players saying, "Oh no, we don't want this." But in reality is they do, because it does benefit them. And we have to remember, for the large players, for the YouTubes, the Amazons, and the Facebook especially, the reason they want this, they're providing you free services. They're providing you free services because you're the product. They are effectively selling you, both to advertisers and other things, and to the intelligence community. They're selling you. So they want to reduce whatever barrier they can to get access to you, and they want to make sure that you use them as opposed to another player. So regulation suits them, and they want that facade of the tension between them and the government, which isn't really there.
The John Kozlowski, the parties that rose under the light hand treatment of the earlier period, that is to say prior to 2 years ago, that arose under Clinton and Bush, a much freer hands-off system. Those parties were Google, Yahoo, Amazon, Netflix, Comcast, Verizon. They are pro-net neutrality. In other words, they're incumbents, and so they're for the system. But those who are against net neutrality are small players. That would be perhaps groups such as Peace Communications in Chattanooga, or RevTel, which is an ISP in Dayton. That against it are small players, hardware providers such as Cisco, free market think tanks, and a few disinterested academicians, professors say this is an affront to progress. And Ajit Pai, in his paper about this that came out in April, says that it has cost many tens of thousands of jobs on the jobs that would have been created by the internet. To the price, I think of I'm thinking 15 billion. Don't have the number here in front of me. I'm sorry. $5.1 billion capital investments not made in the internet because of this rule. I bet he's underestimating that dollar figure. But so who is for net neutrality again, and who's against it? You're saying the big players are for it. The names I gave you indicate that they're for it, and yet it also seems that some smaller players are for net neutrality. In other words, keeping what we have. John Kozlowski.
Well, I do. Right, I do think the problem is the idea, the name. It's like so many other names, the Patriot Act, things of that nature. You give it a name, but it doesn't match the reality. The idea of neutrality on the network sounds like a good idea, but I think the reality isn't. It's a great name, but it's not a great reality, because the free market does indeed work, and it would work well on the internet. It would work well on the internet. One is you get rid of the regulation, because again, the regulation benefits the larger players. The regulation allows the larger players to maintain their foothold. The larger players are frequently tied to the large advertisers, the intelligence community, and things of that nature, where they get a lot of their funding. That's how they can give you the free services. But the solution also can be done with technology. We have an internet that is set up kind of inverted. You will see a great example is what's happening right now with the BRICS countries that are trying to take control away from the .com arena, because there is the domain name issue has risen up again with them, and they're trying to what they're calling a separate internet. It's not really a separate internet; it's just a separate domain name system, in order to reduce the control of the large player, the dominant player in the United States. So that can be done with technology. That's relatively simple technology, but you can go one step further by bringing that technology to the consumer. You had a gentleman call, and he talked about the bottlenecking, as he termed it, where an ISP would sell you a 15 meg line, but he's only providing you 15 meg for the entire neighborhood. Well, the solution for that is, yes, you have the 15 meg line, but if I want to send an email, I want it now, and I could pay a higher price for that email. But if I want to do video, and if I want it now, I have to bump somebody else off. So I will say, okay, I'll pay a higher price per byte as that message flows. If I want to plan to watch a video tonight or tomorrow, I could schedule it to have it happen overnight during lower peak times. And using technology, I could effectively bid for the traffic, and I become now the person who makes the decision whether or not the traffic should be done now or do it at a lower cost time. Reversing that, instead of putting that in the hands of the larger players, but putting it in the hands of the consumer, I think is a solution to all the idea of net neutrality, all the regulations and things of that nature that are there. Simply put it back into the hands of the consumer, and the question is off the table.
We're talking with John Kozlowski, who is a programmer and software designer and privacy advocate in Cleveland. Well, John, the net neutrality scheme seems to resemble very much the anti-gouging statutes that many states have on their books. For example, Florida has one, and when a hurricane approaches and people are fleeing the storm in mass, filling up one side of the interstate and buying gas and supplies on the way, or preparing for the arrival of a storm and buying lumber and nails from the local hardware store, anti-gouging laws prevent prices from rising to meet the stronger demand. And what happens when these statutes are brought into effect is that you have sudden shortages because people buy assets that without the consideration of price. And so people who are there first get the asset, and people who really need it, when they arrive too late, can't get it because it's already been bought at a lower price, a price below the real market, right? The real market would be where demand meets the availability. And so you have shortages that are guaranteed, and then you have criminalization of people who reasonably raise prices to make sure they continue to have supplies for people who really need it. The real need, John, is people who have the money to pay for it, and they're willing to pay more because they're desperate for it. And that's what the marketplace does. The marketplace with rising prices guarantees resupply. And if you have a marketplace where prices are not allowed to control, you have shortages, and you have, as you suggest, bottlenecks. John Kozlowski.
Agree. Yes, and just as the gouging thing just simply leads to regulation, it doesn't really solve the problem. When a tragedy occurs, prices will obviously go up because of the scarcity of resources. This is why you've discussed frequently the idea of scarcity is what effectively determines price. So you apply that to the internet. You have scarcity in the sense of bandwidth. And the way to allocate that is not to say, let's be fair, everybody gets an equal share, but no, let's say this is worth it to me right now, because it may be worth it to me at 3 p.m. to have a larger chunk of bandwidth, but it wouldn't be worth it to me to pay a larger price at 9 p.m. or at 3 a.m. So to allow me as the consumer to decide when it's appropriate for me to pay a higher price or a lower price. It's appropriate for me to pay a higher price for a phone call because I want to make sure that phone call gets through rather than be broken up. But if I'm simply watching a video, that doesn't really matter to me that much, especially if it's this kind of thing where I plan to watch this tomorrow. So those kind of things can be priced by the technology and determined by the consumer, not by a regulation agency, the state, by the large players. The whole purpose of having the large players force you to be able to put a large bandwidth is so they can get you. Again, you are the product. They want to get to you. They want to be able to get information from you. They want to get you hooked on their system, on you. Again, look at the example of Facebook. They don't charge you a penny, and they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Where's that money coming from? It comes from the advertising funds and the intelligence community. They are providing services, and the service they're providing is you to their customers. You're the product.
This is David Tulis. Thanks for joining us here at 92.7. We're talking with programmer John Kozlowski, a privacy advocate in Cleveland. Now, John Agitpie, in his very fine essay describing his plans, says that the current regime that's 2 years old has stifled innovation and investment, especially in places that are already sort of underserved and that are hard to get to. And he mentions an Arkansas ISP called Aristotle, whose chief said, before the Title II order was adopted, it was our intention to triple our customer base and cover a 3-county area. However, we've pulled back on those plans, scaling back our deployment to 3 smaller communities that abut our existing network. And then he quotes another one in Northern Illinois that said it delayed plans to upgrade to increase customer speeds from 3 Mbps to 20. Whisper serves 8,000 customer, cut back on investments, resulting in slower speeds. And again, that's because there's this black cloud, as they describe it, hanging over their affairs, and people at the margins are benefited by an active and competitive marketplace. Would you agree with that, John Kozlowski?
Oh, yes, and one of the things that we got to look at is look at what happens in foreign countries that don't have the net neutrality examples. Look in Japan and South Korea and places that nature where there is competition. People get much higher speeds there than they do here at lower prices, because people will literally come to your door and say, "I want your business." Right now, you have AT&T, Time Warner, and in Chattanooga, you have the state sponsored EPB. So you have a very few players, and you have to go to them. Whereas the examples in other parts of the world, these are vendors who want to sell to you. They'll come to you, and they will bend over backwards to get your business. They want your business because you're valuable to them. Whereas if you are dominated, if it's AT&T and Comcast, and that's about it, they don't care.
So what's happening with Agitpie, John Kozlowski, is that we have a return to the free market, which is the high monetary bid wins, and that's just that. In that one phrase encapsulates the whole idea of prosperity and free enterprise. The highest bid wins. So for a particular service like restaurant services, you have low bids. These low bids end up going to Crystal. Then you have mid-level bids. They go to Chili's, and then the high-level bids go to Rodizio Grill downtown. You spend $20 for a meal with a hamburger, or you spend $5. That's the bidding process for food services, right? And he promises to bring that back to the internet. It is effectively freedom. There's more freedom going to happen. More investment is likely to happen because pricing does discriminate. Discrimination of pricing allows an allocation of providers and consumers, and that seems to be ahead, John Kozlowski.
Agreed, and I do think we got to keep both factors in mind. One, you're the consumer; you should have the choice whether you want the low-end product or the high-end product. And the other factor we got to keep in mind is that for the large players, for the Facebooks, the YouTubes and whatnot, you're the product. So please keep that in mind. You're the product. So it's not a level playing field.
Well, listen, John Kozlowski, thanks for chatting with my listener. How can my listener who runs a business get a hold of you if he needs some programming services, John?
John at Kozlowski.org. I've had an email address that goes back over 20 years, and I don't think most people can't do that today. But Kozlowski.org is me.
John at Kozlowski.org, and Kozlowski is Kozlowski.
That's me. Yes, sir.
John at Kozlowski.org. Thanks, John, for chatting with us.
Delighted.
This is David Tulis. We're glad you're giving us a couple minutes of your time. We argue that you should love your neighbor and buy local, and price discrimination is how the market works. We don't want people saying, "Hey, your market needs to be neutral." Think about your business. Your business here in Chattanooga. If the government said, let's say, city government said, we now have restaurant neutrality. Everybody has to buy the same. Every time you buy a hamburger, you have to get this same number of fries. You can't have more. You can't have less. You can't have a large bag of fries or a small. Everybody has to have the neutral, middle-sized container of fries. And as far as hamburgers, well, we really think that there should be one main size of hamburger, and no one should offer bigger or smaller. And hey, double-decker hamburgers with cheese on top, that's discriminatory. We're not going to allow that. The same size for everybody. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 90.